Okay, everybody, I'm going to go through the stimulus. Well, actually, I'm going to go through a recap what Performance Task 2 does, go through the stimulus, and then talk about ways this could look for your students and then resources to help you get there. So, uh, for Performance Task 2, you are given sources, and then students are supposed to synthesize them and come up with thematic topics or topics based on individual sources, but at least using two of the stimulus sources to come up with an argument. Okay, so let's go through this real quick. So the blueprint for PT2 is that you have an individual written argument, which is a paper is about 2,000 words plus or minus 10%. You develop a research question based on a thematic connection, or a topic that is inspired by the stimulus, and you have to use at least two stimulus sources. It could be the sources can be like inspiration or source material. So you got that's what you have for the individual written argument. For the individual multimedia presentation is 20%. And then that's a presentation that's about 6 to 8 minutes. And then you have the oral defense questions after the presentation. So let's look at some of the sources. These are a little bit out of order, but um, in the notes that I give you, I'll give you some other background. So we're looking at this source, and the general theme that I'm finding is connection. And so when we're looking at this source, Walk to Kobe, some things that you may want to look at, it gives some background context is the 1997 earthquake and how that changed the dynamic of the towns and the city. Discussing how hometowns tie into a person's identity, uh, how changes in individuals and towns impact connections to hometowns. And what I mean by that is, as a person grows, as a person lives, their experiences and connections to places are different as they grow, and also how places change the connections we have to our hometown. So, for example, I when you look around in Houston and there's things that are missing, or where people used to say that used to be field over there, or whatever, those kind of things. Um, Also, kind of discussing the inevitability of change in this story, and how it's important whether or not, whatever it is, so time, age, natural disasters, economic development, or decline. I put a few important quotes in here uh, so that you can see how these things tie together, and some of these are on the screen here. Uh, the Dad Ballpark will live on in our shared memory is basically a story, a personal story about Candlestick Park, but the connection and memories this author shared with her father going to this park, and how the physical connection remains on. And so just some things you may want to consider in teaching this. Show pictures of the park, discuss the 1989 earthquake and the impact of these things in the city and the construction of the park. Discuss emotional connections to places, those kind of things that will help students understand the context of this work. So, this piece, spaces of consumption, connection, and community, exploring the role of coffee shop in urban lives. This piece, I think, will need a little bit more guidance for your students, for a simple fact that this is based specifically in the UK, which has a very different cultural and racial demographic makeup than the US. And so I think that students may not get the context of it, because a lot of the idea behind this work is talking about replacing the idea of pubs, um, or public houses, with coffee shops to create community. And a lot of students may not understand the notion of pubs. And so I would utilize other common or formerly common community spaces that we use in the United States, such as libraries, churches, community centers like the Y, or gyms, or maybe bodegas or corner stores, or even parks. Like those are more common uh, in our communities. And the other thing that I think will need to be considered is uh, the loss of third spaces, and different ways communities are formed. So I think kids may have different perspectives, and I think that's something that is a valid discussion. So instead of saying that we all need to go to a certain physical space, we may have online communities, we may have learning communities, we may have gaming communities, and these are still communities and things of connections and technically third spaces, but they aren't physical in the same way. Another thing that may be an issue for a lot of the campuses that some of you are on is just the understanding that coffee shops are not present in all neighborhoods. And so those things may be an issue. Also, there's a part in the introduction that talks about coffee shops being a symbol of gentrification in a lot of places. And so that might be a part of the conversation as well, because it may be the reverse of community in that sense. Um, and so as it goes on into the coffee shop thing, it talks about types of activities that are connected to these coffee shops. And you may have to have a distinct conversation about what type of community is being built from the people and what type of community is being built from the actual cafe or coffee shop. And there's a distinction in how those things impact um, neighborhoods. So when you're having these conversations with students, just keep that in mind as you're reading or discussing this piece. Um, the 35 years after Berlin Wall opened up, fragments of East Germany's border remain by the Associated Press. I think the main part is just kind of showing the dynamic or the historical background of the Berlin Wall period, before and after the fall. There is and it's this piece is a picture, a photojournalistic piece, and I think it's important to make sure that you have these pictures so that they can see the difference. And so in this article, it's important because not only do you need to show the background of it, but like how the repurposing of the remaining parts of the wall, or former pieces of the wall, are being used to as like cultural connections, or public space for art, and why those things still create community, even though this was a major symbol of division. So those are the kind of, you want to talk about the paradox and the irony of these things. So consider that when you're having those conversations, but you still probably need to have some background information as to the importance or significance of the Berlin Wall. So this piece, How Roads Have Transformed the Natural World, um, this is interesting. I mean, it still talks about connection in the sense that we need roads to connect us to things. And what I would consider is talking about how roads simultaneously give humans greater access, while it also may impede the natural world. You may want to show them pictures of this or whatever. Also, the notion of road ecology, I would make sure that they really understand the definition of it, and that the students may not really be able to process it. But basically, road ecology is a study or a practice that seeks to not impede the natural world, while simultaneously creating transportation access for humans. And that could be in a whole bunch of different ways. You also need to discuss, and I think a lot of times our students, especially in this day and age, will gravitate mostly to the natural impact, the negative impacts on the world, as far as like uh, climate change or whatever. But also they need to look at some of the unexpected benefits. So like funneling rainfall into deserts, or providing food for roadkill food for like vultures and raptors, or providing wildflowers for butterflies. So things like that. So looking at how these things are essential to create connections, but also create divisions in other aspects, but making sure that they understand what road ecology actually does. And so that's important in this piece. So, um, yeah, so I think that's important when you're looking at it. The This is probably the longest piece. The sustainability assessment of low Earth orbit, satellite broadband, mega constellations. Um, so I think the main thing with this one is while we have a internet access issue here in Houston, the issue is different. We're not talking about necessarily like economic lack of access. What we're talking about is broadband, low access, and maybe giving them some background into why certain rural neighborhoods don't have access to internet, and so why these things are important, and why um, having that type of access is important as far as connection is concerned. And I think what they'll think about is just basically like social media or the internet or having Netflix, not thinking about like why it's important to have access to the internet, say for education or for medical care or whatever. And so having not having access in these neighborhoods can be an impediment to somebody's health or mental well-being or whatever. And so these are some kind of conversations that you need to have. There's also a social cost for these things. And so, and mostly the carbon cost, which is tied to creating broadband connectivity. And so this may be a little bit of a complicated kind of breakdown. And so if you can figure out a way to kind of have this conversation just to make sure that students can understand what it's saying as far as sustainability, but also navigating that with ensuring that people have um, access. And it's because this is a scientific journal. This is kind of very complicated, and so maybe finding ways to simplify the data for certain students. All right, so these slides do not share with students because this is basically giving them some information that would help them with the assessment. Now, you can talk to them about it and make sure that they understand the individual sources, but what we don't want to do is basically give them answers. Now, students can have conversations, and I would advise you to have like Socratic seminars or have students post up posters or make connections or talk about topics that they may want to have or themes that they identify, and that's fine. But what we don't want you to slip up on is give students an answer. Okay, so these are some things that you may see with students when you're having conversations and outlines or hearing in your Socratic seminars. But please do not share this information or the teacher notes that I'm posting in your in the Canvas with the students. So here's some similar, here's some connections that you may see. So we have the Berlin Wall, the Walk to Kobe, Dad Ballpark, um, Live On, and the connection is power of memory and place in memory. And so all of these pieces talk about identity in terms of places, historical connections, physical locations, and how they have a relationship not only to us emotionally, physically, but and psychologically or even culturally, but also looking at how places help us make connections and also help us with our memories and our emotional connections. Um, The other one you may see is like the paradox of progress or the irony of progress or something that just talks about the trade-offs of human advancement and connections. And you may see students connect things from like how roads transform the natural world or the LEO satellite study or the epidemic of loneliness. Uh, Another one you may see is designing spaces for communities, and that may include the coffee shop study, the epidemic of loneliness, or the Berlin Wall piece. You may have one You may have a whole bunch of other ones. Also, keep in mind that students don't have to have a thematic connection. They could have something that inspires them. So, for example, let's say you had a student who wanted to talk about uh, gentrification and damage of communities. We could do that based on the coffee source, and then talk about how maybe we talk about the Kobe one. Maybe use some kind of uh, connection to how community development can make cultural connections harder, or make people who are from there lose their cultural connections to a place. So something like that. Um, so when students are doing this, let's say they're doing a thematic connection, it's important for them to identify the theme and be able to connect at least two sources. And clearly, you have to have at least two sources because it's not a theme if it's only one. It's just a topic. So they have to connect. So we had some examples. So we already went through some examples. And so then a student would say, for example, this is an example of using the power of place and memory. They would look at the broad idea, add some nuance to it, talk about what sources they would use, and then develop a question that they can argue. It has two sides to it, and then they come up with other sources to add to that, and then create an argument. Let's look at another example. So let's say if we were doing the paradox of progress, we would look at the broad idea of new technology and connecting with the environment, and then looking at isolation from maybe the epidemic of loneliness and the LEO assessment, and then maybe looking at uh, the this research question. I wouldn't even use this research question, but you may have something like that, and then they would have to connect it to those two sources, and then also find other resources to support it. Okay, so now that we've discussed that, let's look at how we can uh, use resources to support our students in this endeavor. And I'm going to go to the Canvas. So I've done a couple of things. I've taken the PDFs and done individual ones, and then you have graphic organizers that you can help. This is your graphic organizer that you can use to help you as you have conversations with your students. It has quotes, it has links to it. I did a graphic organizer. Please don't give this to students, just so you can have an idea and other potential topics that students may have. I even did a mind map. So these are activities that you can do with students to help them understand and make connections with their materials. We have previous stimulus, so you can have an idea of that. Other graphic organizers that I've done with those, the Socratic Seminar guide, something you can use for that. And then we also have plenty other resources for the IWA and IMP. You have samples here. You have practicing for IMP oral defense questions, and then establishing credibility. This is important, the essential use. If students go through this with them so that they know that if they're not using the stimulus correctly, that they need to go back and make sure that they are using the material correctly. And so they have two decision trees if it's on topic, if they're using the essential sources correctly. You also have activities. You could do the stimulus connections. You can also have a thematic map. You have an IWA checklist. You have a template you could use with your students for the IMP. Uh, all these things to help you with supporting students in accomplishing this. If you have any questions or need other supports, I'm here to help. So thank you and good luck.